to all! Today's daf is Rosh Daf Yod Gimel. We are starting 16 lines from the top, the third to last word on the line. And today's daf is sponsored Lili Nishmas, Mars Miriam, Sarah Basar, Yaakov, Maisha, her neshama should have an aliyah. And Lili Nishmas, Mars Rivka, Basar, Meir, Zev, her neshama should have an aliyah. Now we concluded yesterday's Gemara that Kim L'Hul Rabbanon, the Chachamim know and established that when grain grapes or olives grow a third of their normal size, they're already considered edible, and therefore, if picked, they would be Chayv in Meiser. Whichever year they grew a third in is their year of Meiser. So if they grew a shlish in the second year of Shemitah cycle, one has to separate Meiser Rishon and Sheni. If they grew a shlish in the third year, then one would have to separate Meiser Rishon and Meiser Ani. Now Rabbi Yirmiyah had asked, how is it possible that Chachamim knew when a plant has reached a shlish of its growth? It's not possible. And now the Gemara tells us, Hadar Amar Rabbi Yirmiyah. Rabbi Yirmiyah then said, Lav Mil Sehida Amri. It's really not so that which I said. The Chachamim actually do know when it's grown a third. And how do we know that? The the colleagues asked Rav Kahana, the carbon Omer which is brought on the second day of Pesach, so the Yidden that came with Yeshua into Eretz Yisrael for the very first time, where did they get that barley from? In timer, if you want to say the Ayel Biyad Nachri, that they got it from a guy, meaning it grew in a guy's possession, that can't be, because Ketzirchem Amar Achmana, the Torah says it has to be your harvest of like Ketzir Nachri, and not the harvest of a guy. And therefore, if it grew in the Gentiles' Roshos, even though you might have harvested it, that's considered like the Ketzir of the Nachri. So it can't be they got it from a Gentile. And now we just ask you, mind Krivu, who says they brought the Omer when they came into Eretz Yisrael for that very first time? Dil Malay Krivu, perhaps they didn't bring the carbon Omer. We say, don't say that. The pasuk says, and they ate from the produce of the land, after Pesach. Now, they ate only after Pesach, they were eat from the produce. But they didn't eat from the produce before Pesach. That's because they krivu Omer, they first brought the carbon Omer, and then they ate the produce. As we know, you're not allowed to eat any of the new grain until the carbon Omer is brought. So it must be that they brought the carbon Omer. So once again, we will go back to the question, where did they get this barley from? So Armalhan, he told them, they got it from anything that hadn't grown yet a third in the hands of a Nachri, meaning they just came into Eretz Yisrael, they made sure that they found grain that hadn't grown a third yet. And now Rabbi Yirmiyah concludes his proof, perhaps it had grown a third and they just didn't know what's considered growing a third. It must be they do know when it's considered having been grown a third already. So to over here, Kimlahu, the Chamim do know when something's considered having grown a third, and therefore they are able to establish this as the cutoff for Meiser for grain, grapes, and olives. But now we ask in Rabbi Yirmiyah and say that's not necessarily a right, because perhaps when they came into Eretz Yisrael, they made sure they found grain that didn't grow at all, and only then they were certain that it grew completely in their possession. But perhaps if it had already grown a quarter, so they don't know if it grew a third or a little bit less than a third, and therefore they didn't take grain like that, and therefore we can technically say that like Kimlahu, they don't know when it's grown a third. So we say don't say that. The pasuk says and the nation came up from the Jordan, meaning they came into Eretz Yisrael on the 10th of the month, meaning they got into Eretz Yisrael on the 10th of Nisan. Now, if you want to say that they took grain for the Omer from grain that hadn't grown at all yet by the time they came into Eretz Yisrael, so is it possible for the grain to go from 0 to 100 in 5 days? What you're suggesting is that they came out of the Yarden on the 10th of Nisan, and 5 days later they're harvesting the grain for the Omer, and that means that they harvested grain that grew completely from 0 to 100, meaning it grew from nothing to everything in 5 days. That's not possible. So Elamai must be the Ayel Riva that had already grown a quarter, a danka, or a sixth, and then they were able to harvest it. The Gemara says that's still not a raya, because is it possible that in 5 days something's going to grow from a sixth of its growth or from a quarter of its growth all the way to its full growth? That's not possible either. So Elamai is a so what are we able to say? That Eretz Tzvi Ksevba, it says about Eretz Yisrael that it's Eretz Tzvi, it's the land of the deer.